think about that a lot. Is like, okay, well, here I go. I have to do this, and it's repetitive, but it feels very contemplative and productive at the same time. And it's something that I really wanted to translate into the work, which is why I've coupled the photographs with the drawings, because there's something about the work of making work that's very important in just living and having these responsibilities as a caretaker. So I wanted to translate that in another way, and I didn't want to be super literal about it.
Right.
So, yeah.
I have a comment. Surprise.
Yes.
I think that was a really great, insightful talk, and bringing up Helen Molesworth and this idea of motherhood. I can't remember what year, but when I was in graduate school, I read her catalog on, I think it was called Work.
Yes, it was a
an
catalog from the Baltimore Museum of Art.
So this idea of labor in contemporary art, and I think that that's something that comes up a lot in all of this too, and I wonder if she'll come back and connect the motherhood and labor at some point, because it's really, we talk about an art work, and we don't often think about the labor that goes into that. And being a new mother myself, I get asked a lot of times, I'm not an artist, but I'm in the arts, and people ask me about my work of art, meaning my daughter. I think that, people still have a hard time, especially in conceptual art or in photography, I would argue, of remembering that there's labor involved in making art as well as in raising children and parenthood and motherhood.
Definitely. There's something about these works too that makes me think of care and just this sort of tenderness towards things that you start to develop as a mother. I think just noticing these objects that could look like trash to someone else and creating a beauty in them through focusing on their form, but also in such a very careful and deliberate way, the way a mother would care for a child. So that even translates, I think, into each image.
Yeah, and I also think how things are shifting always, I think. While these images are very considered and strong in that way, compositionally, the light, this is all natural light, so these images are fleeting. I could probably reproduce it if I tried really hard, but it's one of those things, it's like things are constantly changing, right? And it's about being able to adapt to that. And so the use of natural light is part of that in this for me. So I made these works in my studio, and as between like 9 and 9:45, and as the light was moving, I would then move my whole thing like down, as the light on my studio floor was moving, I'd move my construction along with it. And so I guess I'm just thinking, like, while they are very tender and considered, there's this fragility to them also.
Yeah.
So the movement of the light, the fact that these objects are not glued together, they're positioned together. With every sort of move I make, the image shifts.
Yes.
Caitlin, now that you mentioned that, now that you mentioned that, that to me connects also with your drawings. The repetition of move and take.
Reading this one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the circadian dragon thing 1 and thing 2. I think repetition is in all parts of your work.
For sure.
That hadn't dawned on me.
Yeah, and Stranger Lives too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's part of it. It's about the repetition of the daily and the monotony of it, and the work of it, and the hardship of it.
Mm-hmm. Were your physical movements, maybe this is irrelevant, were your physical movements the same? Like, did you develop a habit when you were moving your paper again and again?
No. Everyone was different. You got to be able to adapt, be nimble to these things.
But I do see these as a form of portraiture,
Yeah.
and which I find really interesting. I mean, I now seeing almost everything as portrait because of my work at the portrait gallery, although I feel like these are very specific to your identity, right, at when they were made.
Yeah.
And as extensions of your life in the world, and, you know, your movement through the world and through certain moments with your children that were repeated, so.
The twisted metal, or the twisted spoon and metal,
Hi.
what's really cool about the whole collection is that there's history with each one of these items. There's a story behind them, and the twisted spoon really makes me curious because I'm trying to figure out how in the world did that spoon ever get twisted like that? What caused it, you know? And so it just stimulates the creative process of trying to figure out what was going on with each one of these items, where do they come from. So it really stimulates the curiosity. And it's great for kids. I'm an art teacher too. Work at the Rescue Community Center, and I'm also an art teacher. We're introducing this to our students. And what's interesting is to be able to find out from them, what do they see? What do they think happened? And so it's a very engaging process. So what you're doing is you're finding these objects that already have a history of their own, but then they become something else to other people and for you. Collecting these things and putting it together, and the fact that your son or your children are with you, that also stimulates another story of all this that's going on. So, I really appreciate your artwork, and it's very engaging.
I love how open-ended it is too. As you said, anyone could come up with their own interpretation. And we don't know, you probably don't know how that spoon was, there's
No, it's really interesting, actually. I mean, there are so many spoons discarded on the ground. It's kind of surprising, and one of the things that kind of came, I don't know, I was having a discussion with somebody, like, maybe they're just like crack, or something, like rug spoons of some sort. But I don't know. It's kind of strange.
That's one story.
That's one story. Yeah, the other one, I won't go into it. But yeah, I mean, for the objects having their own meanings, but they've become sort of treasure, in this way. And now I have them all cataloged, and so they've taken on a completely different history than what they previously had. And so I don't know how the spoons got twisted. I have my own.
But you found them, right?
I did. Oh, yes.
Well, I was thinking about the objects, and to me, one of the things about being a mom is that you're always kind of worried about what's happening and what they pick up and what they might do with it when they pick it up, like stick it in their mouth. And to me, a lot of these objects have sharp edges, and they're glass, there's nail.
Yeah.
There may be things that you might reflectively say, I don't really want you to hold that. But you let your kids hold that, and then you also selected those items. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk about how that process was.
When I realized that they were looking for treasure and shiny objects and things like that, I just I allowed them. I said, be careful, but just, I just let them pick up whatever they want. It didn't really concern me too much, I would sometimes take those things and help them carry them somewhere else. But the things that I didn't let them pick up were like real trash, like those little flossers and stuff like that. And I was like, that's really dirty. It didn't really bother me about the sharp edges, but
That's interesting too.
Germs are kind of gross.
In terms of Ruth Asali, there are images of, she worked with wire, with sharp ends, and there are images of her working with children with wire. So I feel, and there's a whole philosophy of education that came from Italy. That's my children went to a preschool that uses this philosophy, Reggio Emilia, where they actually have jars in the classrooms filled with glass pieces, and scissors are around, and objects that you wouldn't necessarily, wire, things that you wouldn't necessarily think of handing a child, but the philosophy is that you trust the child with these beautiful objects, and you supervise them, and that they'll create something beautiful with them, and that they can be trusted. So I think you're giving your children a gift and letting them handle these kinds of things early. So, yeah.
I want to go back to, you made a comment at the beginning of when you were starting to speak about biography of the artist and how, you know, before you weren't actually supposed to write about the artwork with the biography of the artist behind it. And thinking about working at the portrait gallery and how the biography of the subject is so important, and wondering how now feeling able to include biography of the artist in your research, how that's affecting the work that you're doing. And
yeah, no, it's a great point. And I see that come into play now that we commission portraits of living subjects, and we have to pair artists with those subjects, and usually what ends up, it comes down to something about how the two people relate through some experience in their lives. So the biography just rushes to the surface in both cases. I mean, it happened even with the Obama portraits. It happened with a portrait that we were going to commission of Meryl Streep by the Chinese-American artist Hung Wu, who saw Kramer versus Kramer in China when she was in communist China, and she was struggling in her marriage, and she identified with Meryl Streep's character. So when we offered her a list of potential people to paint for the collection, she said, I've got to paint Meryl Streep because I've identified with her since that moment, and they're the same age. So you can't get away from it in portraiture. And for a portrait to be successful ultimately, there needs to be a connection, and that we need to know the life story of the people involved to find those connections. But I also think art history and art criticism is changing so much that not only is it all right to bring biography out, it's also all right to use words like empathy, and to talk about how an artwork can evoke empathy, and that was a word that was not accepted before. So even at CAA, this winter in New York, I'm speaking on a panel on art and empathy. It's even in the title of a panel. So I love the way that things change over time, and maybe it's also our current moment, and this need to talk about life and the dimensions of life and how we are all sort of surviving in such deeply divided and troublesome times.
Yeah. The portraits that are chosen for the Outwin
Yes.
collection or contest,
Yes.
do any of those become part of your collection?
That's a great question. Some do. Our mission at the Portrait Gallery is to collect portraits of people who have had a significant impact on the history of the nation. So if someone submits a portrait of a person who has had a significant impact, yes, that work can be considered, and we have taken work into the collection from the competition, but it's a matter of the subject of the portrait, really, ultimately.
Because last time, there weren't a lot of
There rarely are.
quote, famous
right.
people.
Right, but every now and then there are.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the last competition, the 2016, there was a portrait of Alison Bechdel, the writer, and that's come into the collection. So. questions? I'd be happy to continue the conversation individually, but it's been such a privilege to have this time to sit with Caitlin's work and to see where her work is going. I think that she's really such an amazingly brilliant and thoughtful artist, and I just love the fact that her work continues to move in new directions and unexpected directions in some ways.
Way unexpected.
But still relates back always to
Yeah, I
where
can't
you
shake
were,
the,
right?
shake the
So-
theme, but it manifests itself in a different way every time. Which, I don't think I could do the same work for my entire life. I think it's constantly going to be changing and looking different and expressing in different ways.
Well, and
yeah.
I'm curious, is that, do you think, in a sense, this statement about life and death, power, vulnerability, magnificence, and uncertainty, it seems like that is a thread that runs
Totally.
through your various bodies of work. so
Absolutely,
far.
yeah, and when you read it originally, I was thinking about it in relation to these, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that like 5 years ago for me. Yeah, yeah, so, absolutely.
So that's nice.
Definitely rings
That's
true.
good.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, thank you all, and thank you, Lily.
Thank you.
Um,